Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of AmeriCorps VISTA and the Corporation for National and Community Service. Today's webinar is Strengthening VADs and Service Opportunities Listings. I'm Patrick Triano, AmeriCorps VISTA's Director of Training and Member Support, and I'll be your host. Supporting the presentation today is Molly Pelzer, working with me here in VISTA headquarters, who will be monitoring the chat panel and facilitating the question and answer. Our classroom manager, who will be advancing the slides, is Andy Clark, who right now is hidden behind the WebEx technology. And our guest speaker today is Kathy Linz, trainer for VISTA through JBS International and founder of Development Plus Incorporated. Very good. So, today's learning objectives. First is to articulate the key elements of an effective VAD, that's VISTA assignment description. To be able to write member activities that reflect VISTA's focus on capacity building and community engagement, and the ability to transfer key elements of the VAD to create an engaging service opportunity listing. So helping us reach these objectives, Kathy has worked with VISTA sponsors and supervisors since 1998 and has been working with nonprofits in organizational development and community engagement both nationally and internationally. So Kathy, with that, I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you, Patrick. Hi, everyone. This is Kathy Linz. And first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for submitting their areas of interest and questions about the VADs when you registered. I just want to let you know that I'm going to be working to weave in some of those comments and questions in today's session. Please use the chat box and the question box that you see as you have more. You'll find those on the right-hand side of your screen. We've designed this particular session so that you'll have a time to actually interact with me as we go through this program, particularly using the chat box. So make sure you know exactly where that is. I'm going to go ahead and get started by talking about some basics. And the first, of course, is what is a volunteer assignment description, this VAD that we're talking about. The VAD details the activities that a VISTA member will perform during a year of service. As VISTA supervisors and sponsors, we're asked to fill out a volunteer assignment description or a VAD form for each VISTA member who serves on a VISTA project. When it comes for each VISTA, then, a VAD will explain a project position and role assigned to a member. So it's going to serve both as a position description and a work plan. And you're going to find that they include goals, objectives, and activities that a member is expected to complete in order to satisfy the project needs. If we've written it well, it will really help us to translate the milestones that we've talked about in our proposals when we first were applying for this into a realistic set of activities that we now can work with the VISTA on as we go forward. So the VAD helps the VISTAs identify a course of action. Supervisors can use the VAD to frame a few important conversations. The VAD indicates the project priorities, so they really know what's important. They help explain what the organizational and community challenges are, and they talk about the purpose of the project. So it would really help as supervisors if we could keep in mind that the VAD is a living document. The VAD can be adapted as the project evolves and as the unique strengths of the VISTA become apparent. However, I want to mention that significant changes to the VAD should be discussed with your corporation state office. We can't just randomly go ahead and make them. We need to make sure that we work with the rest of the chain of communication. Keep in mind also that the VAD has multiple uses, both before the VISTA begins at their site, particularly when we're looking at recruitment and selection, and once they arrive so that we can look at the performance piece. So keeping in mind those uses will help create a better VAD. We'll be touching on recruitment later in this session. The key things I like to have you think about is that VADs are written per year, per assignment. So, for example, A 3-year project will require 3 separate VADs. Similarly, projects with several VISTAs on them will require a unique VAD for each VISTA member. And keep in mind also, all VADs must be created through your eGrants account. We won't go into how exactly to work in eGrants in this session, but I am going to note some points about the VAD creation process that has an impact on how it's used in the eGrants system. So with that, I'm going to move forward to the next slide. I wanted to share this particular graphic because it's one that we actually talk about when we have our National VISTA Supervisor orientations. It captures some of the core ways that we can use the VAD to help make the VISTA year more productive for the site and for the VISTA, and will lead to project success. So if you're looking at this slide and seeing that it's VAD informed, you're going to see there's a left side with this 2 circles and a right side. On that left side, I'm thinking about in terms of before the VISTA starts. We're talking about outreach and recruitment, which means that we're helping define who we're looking for, where we're going to find them, and how to connect with them. As well as the second is selecting a VISTA candidate, making sure that we use the VAD so that we ask the right questions when we're going through the selection process. On the right-hand side, we're talking about once the VISTA is on site. So we're guiding and supporting our members, and we're helping them to get started and create a plan for continued development. Not only saying, here's the work that must be done, but here's some of the training and development that you as a member are going to need to be successful in completing that work. As well as that, we're using this to assess performance. We're helping the VISTAs and the project define success. I'd like to find out at this point how many of you are using the VAD for these very kinds of things already. So let's get ready to do our very first poll. At this time, we're going to ask you to go ahead and mark off as many of these as apply to you. How many of you have used a VAD for these items? You're going to find that the poll will open up on the lower right-hand side of your screen, and make sure that you hit the submit button when you're finished, when you've checked out the ones that you have. If you're somebody who hasn't created a VAD yet, we do have a spot for you as well. So check those out, and we'll go ahead and start to fill those pieces out.
All right, I don't yet see the poll, but when it does show, please, everyone, vote early, vote often. Has the poll appeared?
Andy?
Hey everyone, we're having a little bit of difficulty with the with opening the poll today, so we may just want to move on and come back to that later.
All right. So polls are closed on account of weather.
Well, here's the thing I'd like to have you just keep in mind is I recognize going into this based on the comments that I saw. For some of you, the VAD process is new, and y'all said, fill me in. What do I need to know? And for others of you, it's a refresher. So I'm hoping that we can kind of use this as a guide to help us as we go forward, just to realize if we have these uses, how then do we want to write our VAD so that we can actually make it as useful as possible? And I want to just point out that later in this session, we're going to particularly be highlighting and talking about this particular outreach and recruitment component. So be watching for that in the second half as we go forward on this piece. Andy, I'm going to have us go ahead to the next slide. We wanted to start with some basics, and so we'd like to just talk a little bit about some of the key elements of a VAD actually are. And to help us do this, you'll find that on the VISTA campus, we have a sample VAD on that particular spot, and it's used at the supervisor training. The organization that it's written for is the Whitaker Community Services, or WCS, and they run a youth mentoring program. So we wanted to hopefully show you an example and be able to show you that there is a sample VAD available at the VISTA campus. And we're going to that particular example at this time. What you're going to find when we're talking about key elements of the VAD, we've got to make sure that we, in fact, have the title. And I don't have my tools yet, but when they do, you'll find that on the top of the screen there, where the very first thing we start with is we've got a title. Every VAD you create requires a distinct title. If you happen to be creating multiple similar VADs, you may want to think about creating a naming system. That might include attributing the year or creating a job number in addition to a descriptive title so that they know which ones it's going to, in fact, include. The next main component that we're talking about when you're looking at this particular piece is all the other details that have to actually be put in. When you're creating and you're working with VADs, you can actually be copying and pasting some of the elements of those texts from the proposal that you wrote over into this section. So there'll be the project name, the numbers, the period that you're working with. I just also want to mention that it really helps to make sure that you've got the time frame clearly laid out for that particular piece, because you're going to reuse this for recruitment processes, but it's also going to be something that VISTA take a look at the pre-service orientation. The biggest thing about the VAD is that when we create it, we want to make sure that we're writing it in a way that makes it clear, because that's the kind of thing that makes VISTAs nervous when they're not quite sure. Is that the right time frame? Is this really what they meant? So we want to be aware of those particular components. I'm going to move forward and just kind of point out here just quickly. We're going to highlight in a little bit the project goals, the objectives, as well as the member activities. And we're going to take a closer look at those in some of the slides that are coming up. Let's start off with the project goals. The main thing that we want to make sure that it gets included in the goal is that we explain how exactly this project is addressing poverty and define how the VISTA activities will build capacity. And our sample VAD gave us some really helpful notes just to give us an example of that. So in the first half, you will literally see to help ensure that children of incarcerated parents receive the educational, social, and emotional support they need to help them break the cycle of poverty. We're starting to really lay out for the VISTAs when they look at those project goals, how exactly are we addressing poverty? And then the second part, we're actually giving them specifics. I really want to mention and highlight this piece because so often when I look at VADs, when I'm working with supervisors, sometimes I'll just see people who write things like, they'll build capacity. We need to go a little bit further than that and actually tell them exactly how are we going to be doing that. How are they going to be building that particular piece? So trying to make sure that we can include these two components within those goal statements. And again, a lot of these are going to come directly from your project plan. So we can actually be strengthening our project plans and the initial proposals that we did so that we can then carry them over to these particular pieces. I'm going to move forward to the next slide. We're talking about then the objectives and the member activities. The objectives identify what the VISTAs will actually be achieving. They should be actually starting to articulate and include more, each VAD should include more than one objective and include completion dates for each one. So, and what that will lead to, and I wanted to make sure I put these together, and if I would have you go ahead, Andy, and just do another click on here. When we write good objectives, they'll tie in directly to our member activities, which will be specifying the particulars of what it is that VISTAs are going to be doing to achieve the objectives. So we have the bigger project goal, the smaller milestones along the way, which are the objectives, and then the particular steps that actually show up for our member activities. So we've got a sample objective here just to kind of give people an idea of what it would look like, making sure that we tell people when exactly will it be completed, what exactly are we going to be doing, and, you know, just so that they have a couple of sentences that tell them here's the basic first step, and then we're going to break it down a little bit further with our member activities. I'm going to go ahead and move us forward. We want to make sure that we're describing the outcome of the set of activities, not more than a sentence or two. This is not about writing whole paragraphs, just a couple of key sentences. Check back and make sure that what you've written for your outcome aligns and for your objectives aligns with your goal statement. The easiest way for me, and I noticed that a couple of people commented about logic models and how that fits in. When I start to think about creating what I'm going to do, I think about what's the end that I want, my outcomes, my objectives, that goal statement that I have, and then I back it up and I ask, what would it look like if I were doing that? I know my goal statement. This is what it would look like. Those become my objectives. And then as I look at those objectives and I think about what capacity building would I have to do for my agency so that we can actually fulfill those outcomes. That's defining what it is that we're asking the VISTAs to do. They're there for capacity building. So if we know the project goal, we know what outcomes we want to create that project goal in our communities, what kind of capacity building are we asking the VISTAs to do? Those are the kinds of things that are going to start showing up in our objectives within our VAD. I'm going to move us forward again. Because I've been doing quite a bit of work with different supervisors, I spent some time talking to them about, like, how can we make this easier to really understand what has to go into a VAD. And what we've come up with in our conversations are three key areas that we want to take a look at. One of them is the assess, which is really the introductory stage of the work that the VISTAs are going to do on site. The second is act, which is the specific capacity building action that we want the VISTAs to do. And the last is transfer. This helps the VISTAs and the sites complete the circle so that the sites can use what the VISTAs have done for long-term success. I just want to highlight a little bit more about what would we mean when we say these particular components. So we're going to go to the next slide where we're looking at the assess piece. A lot of times when I've spent time talking with the supervisors and looking at their VADs, and I've seen supervisors list things like, VISTAs will attend meetings, which is absolutely true. VISTAs will, in fact, attend meetings. But I have to say to them, that really doesn't tell the VISTA anything about the capacity building you're asking them to do. So my question is why? Why do you have them attending meetings? And often cases they're pointing to some of these things that I list here on the screen as their main explanations. They're trying to help the VISTAs get started well in their particular sites, and they recognize and they say, I want the VISTAs to be able to assess the current state of the volunteer systems or the fundraising and development systems or the communications and marketing or partnerships or technology or whatever it is. I want them to assess and understand what's there currently. They also say, I want them to identify and understand the key players and their part in addressing the community issues. Or in some cases, I want them to understand the historical environment of the project and the community. Or lastly, it's discuss how the members of the target community will be engaged in leadership implementation of this project. And frankly, that one is the heart of the community engagement piece that we say that we want. We're trying to write up our objectives in ways that will really get at and do and address some of these very things. So keep in mind, when VISTAs are looking at these at our interviews or at the PSO, they're trying to understand what it is you're asking of them. And if it's unclear, that's where they get a little anxious about, gee, is this what I want to do for the next year? So let's help set the stage to help them know this is what you're going to be entering into. Let's go to the next slide, which is take a look at this one, where we're actually going to give you a chance to write out, just as a practice, some member activities that a VISTA could do. We're kind of, again, using our sample VAD organization. And here they're saying that they're going to assess the current state of the WCS's efforts in reaching, selecting, and supporting volunteer mentors. Looking just at that component of it, what would be some member activities that a VISTA could do for this objective? I'm going to ask you to go ahead and jot down some answers in the chat section so that, in fact, we can use that and work from that particular piece. Give us some ideas of what kind of things you would think of would be this member activities that a VISTA could do.
So, hi, Kathy. This is Molly. We have some responses coming in. Kathy says that she asked her VISTAs to come to meetings prepared to discuss and report about partnerships they've made in the community, and also related to volunteer hours not being reported. Another response is review application and screening documents or steps. And we've got a few others. Let's see. Interview or survey current volunteer mentors. And, this is a great one. Create or implement a volunteer satisfaction survey. Let's see, coordinate trainings for volunteer mentors, research best practices, review past evaluations or create new evaluations. Another one, catalog, audit current community partners. So those are some really great examples of activities.
These are terrific. And again, this is really how the process tends to go is if you have an idea of what you'd like to draft out and put in, you start brainstorming, like what would that mean? What kind of things do we have them do? Because once you get the brainstorming done, we can always go back in and clean them up a little bit more, but we just got to throw some ideas out there so we have some idea of how we can create this and get it started. These are fantastic. There's some great ones in there, Molly.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we've got volunteer focus groups, and then down in the Q&A panel we have documenting current practices, research best practices for volunteers, and let me see if there's another one, a volunteer satisfaction survey again. And let's see, we already mentioned the focus groups, and it looks like, let's see, the VISTA member could audit current efforts, solicit feedback from stakeholders for what's working, what's not working, unmet needs, etc. So,
okay.
Great.
Again, we wanted to get you at least get your brain thinking about, what would this look like? What might be some activities? I'm going to take us to that next level so we can start to take a look at that one as well. And I'll be honest, this is probably one that most supervisors are probably most familiar with, the whole ACT piece, where we start to say in these objectives, we're going to create the tools, we're going to create the processes. Now, Andy, go ahead and show an example objective that would fall under this. Using our sample VAD, we're talking here about set up outreach systems and build partnerships with community organizations in order to spread the word about the mentor program, develop targeted marketing materials. Frankly, if we were trying to, in fact, do the member activities that would actually go with that kind of objective, we'd be talking about things like create a database of potential partners with their contact information, create a template for program marketing, create a guide for branding all the communication materials, create a talking points sheet to help guide volunteers and staff when talking about the program. Those all be tools that we could actually create. Or we might actually be creating the process, create a training for volunteers on how to design brochures or how to use the database software, create a schedule for volunteers and staff to meet with new partners. Those could all be things that would fit very easily under this type of objective. So creating those upper objectives that says, here's the actual capacity building, the core pieces, and here's the activities that go with it. I'm going to move forward to the next one. And this is the one that we talk about a lot at PSO. We talk about it as supervisors, but we sometimes drop it out somehow when it comes to actually creating our VAD. As supervisors, we need to keep our eye on sustainability. So when I talk to VISTAs, I talk about all the capacity building activities they'll be doing, like they'll be writing grants, they'll be doing assessments, they'll be recruiting volunteers, they'll be creating databases, all of that. And all of that builds capacity. But projects need to think about sustainability beyond the VISTA's 1 year with the project. So we want to make sure that they include that transfer piece. So, for example, the transfer of knowledge, products, and relationships will take it to the next level. So, some live activity actions, examples of what I'm talking about, say a VISTA recruited volunteers. That's a great thing. But who else knows how to do that after the VISTA's gone? I say the VISTA created a database, which is also a wonderful thing. But who else knows how to create or update the database after the VISTA's gone? The question really becomes, who can the VISTA train so they can have that transfer of knowledge? When it comes to projects that the VISTA can leave behind for the organization and the community that they can use, we have alluded to some of those already in the last slide, but it's really that making sure we've thought about, here are the actual products we're going to make sure that they get transferred. And then that last one, transfer relationships. Again, I look at VISTAs, and they're out recruiting volunteers, which is a great thing, but volunteers join because they liked the person who recruited them. How are VISTAs connecting them to the organization so that they stay when the VISTA leaves? Same thing with donors. Relationship building is going to be really critical to getting and keeping those donors. So how is the VISTA connecting them to the organization? We really want to start to think about how is VISTA connecting these folks with the staff and the community volunteers who are going to be continuing to work long after the VISTA year is done. So thinking about that whole transfer piece and writing it in as part of the objectives and activities that we'll be doing. I'm going to move forward, Andy. We wanted to just show you a little bit about the format of how one actually would do this. You're talking about an objective, which is a sentence or two, which is the step down from the project goals of how starting to break this down. And then those member activities, when we actually start to lay them out, we'll have a step, and we may have sub-steps along the way, the sub-activities. That's how it's going to actually start to format and look as you do this work. And just a note, and I believe that they're going to show you in the chat section, there's a resource for writing VADs in the VISTA campus that we want to make sure that we mention to you, just as something that takes you a look at so that you can kind of brainstorm and look at this piece a little bit more. I just want to mention that if you're working in eGrants, always do this work in the Word document first and then cut and paste it over into eGrants, because eGrants will time out, and if your only copy is in eGrants and it times out, you'll have lost everything that you've already done. Do it on another Word document first and then transfer. I want to start taking a look a little more closely at these member activities. So I'm going to move us forward one more time. When we're talking about those particular pieces, we want to think about action verbs when we start these particular member activities listings. It might be words like launch, market, research, collect, assess, compile. The list goes on from there. And the beautiful thing is we've got some of these different examples of a whole list of action verbs that we can use on the VISTA campus, on some of the different materials that we have. So you can use it as a cheat sheet as you do this work. Also be thinking about how can I be clear and specific, but also provide them some details of what it actually means that we're asking them to do. It's that balance between specifics and simplicity. Ideally, we might be talking about 3 pages. Now, realistically, if you're working in eGrants, it's only going to ask you for 1 paragraph. Frankly, that's too short. I mean, it meets the minimum requirements, but for most VISTAs, it doesn't give them enough information about what it is you're actually supposed to be doing. And so, again, it causes that uneasiness because they don't know really what you want. By the same token, I've had VISTAs and supervisors show up at supervisor training, and their VADs have been 12 pages long. That's overkill, folks. Either we have given them way too much to do, or we've explained it in way too much detail. So just really trying to make sure that we think about that balance as we do this particular work. And I also just want to mention that eGrants will limit you to 2,500 characters for each activity, which is about 500 words. So just to be thinking about that if you're working in eGrants. Another piece in that is to make sure that we're realistic. I have had supervisors walk in and they said to me, Kathy, according to this VAD, my VISTA is going to recruit 100 volunteers in the first month. And I look at them and I think, really? Wow. I don't know how in the world they're going to accomplish that. So take a look at those member activities and the objectives that we've written. Is it, in fact, realistic? And start to think about how can we delineate the work for each year. What is it that has to be done in year 1 versus year 2 versus year 3 that will cause that build-up to complete the project, ideally by the end of the 3rd year? Again, we're going to ask you to take some time to chat with us. We'd like to write some member activities that could help fulfill what it is that WCS is trying to do. They're trying to establish a volunteer system and build partnerships. And in this particular case, one of our lead activities is set up a recruitment system. What would be some of the sub-steps to setting up a recruitment system, if you will? I'd ask you to jot that down in the chat box. What would be some examples of setting up a recruitment system for volunteers? Let us know some of your ideas.
We'll wait for just a minute as we have some of our first responses come in. And some steps are, let's see, create a database, research existing models, social media, press release, develop a volunteer assignment, perhaps design a website. These are great. Create communication plan and templates, research like-minded organization systems. Again, describe the volunteer activities and opportunities, attend neighborhood association meetings, design volunteer orientation. Wow, these are great, and you guys just keep them coming in. Create volunteer descriptions again. Let's see, attend college volunteer recruiting events, always great to hook up with universities. Let's see, formally set up partner agreements, setting expectations is excellent, right, and making those guidelines clear. Let's see, do we have any other ones? Let me look down in the Q&A bubble here. Again, creating targeted materials describing volunteer opportunities. So establishing guidelines, setting expectations for the volunteers. So it sounds like, for the most part, Kathy, folks are interested in getting what they want through good volunteer expectations and outreach, and then developing a system to track that while also making partnerships with neighborhood organizations and communities.
These are fantastic ideas. And again, this is that process of how do I set this up? You know, what is it I'm asking them to do? Let's brainstorm what would be some of the different components that we can use. The nice thing is that you'll have the notes from all of this. So let me know in the chat box if anybody found some useful ideas that they can actually use as they're going forward. You know, yes, no, let me know in the chat box. Hopefully we've given you some ideas from activities that we can be doing as we do this work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like social media marketing recruitment is in there, developing the recruitment system that includes orientation, training, and scheduling. And also just a quick question from Kathy. She says that my VISTA has been in place for much longer, but I feel the need to review and add these goals to the VADs, and is this possible? And Kathy, remember that we mentioned earlier in the presentation that you would want to reach out with your state office, but if you feel that the VAD should be changed or updated, I would definitely recommend that that's a possibility to change. Let's see. And we have some questions coming in, so I think we might be ready to move on, Kathy, if you feel like.
Let's go ahead and do that. We're going to finish up this section. We just wanted to remind folks that this VAD, once we've created it, can actually help us in all of these core areas. And at this point, we want to take a little bit of time talking about specifically the outreach and recruitment piece. And we want to just be aware of the fact that since the VAD includes refined language describing the VISTA activities, it becomes an excellent resource for writing position announcements that appeal to applicants and making sure that they're the best suited for the VISTA roles that you've defined. So we want to be thinking about and aware of the fact that the activities that you describe in your VAD can actually populate the member duties section of the position announcement that you've put in actually on an e-grant. So now that we've actually taken a look at what the VAD might be doing and the VISTAs might be doing, how do we actually attract them? And I can already see some questions coming in going, that's the thing I want to talk to you about. So just let me back up and just start by talking about the service opportunity listing. I just want to explain that the My AmeriCorps system shows potential VISTAs a two-line teaser of the position as well as a longer position description. When VISTAs view the CNCS recruitment site, the teaser is what they see first. In order to get to the program description, they have to be enticed enough to actually click the teaser. So that two-line teaser, by the way, which is limited to 200 characters, really has to pop. We've got to think about what is it that's going to draw people in. Effective recruitment messages touch on the characteristics of the program, focus on the needs and the interest of the applicants, and creates an emotional pull. So let's move ahead for just a second here, and we're looking at what actually makes the recruitment message pop. So when you think about your own service opportunities that you have currently listed on the e-grant system, what makes it stand out from the rest? I'd ask you to take some time in the chat box there and let us know what actually would make a recruitment message pop. What is it we'd have to do to really make it stand out from all of the others that are actually on are on the listing for eGrants and my AmeriCorps for what the VISTA see.
Mm-hmm.
Let's fill those couple of things in on the chat box, please.
Yep. So let's see. Travis recommends using words that appeal to people's emotions, help strengthen impact. Also, very practical, noting the service location, city and state is helpful in the teaser. That's definitely true. Let's see if we have any more coming in. So what would you all do to make that recruitment message pop and get your best VISTAs? Liz recommends adding the population that you're serving, connection to aging, youth, etc. Ricky recommends spelling out acronyms, which is very important, just so that we know what folks are seeing and they can understand. Let's see. Claire recommends mentioning a problem and how they can help solve it as a VISTA. Mary Alice says highlighting skills needed or skills gained in the position. Let's see. Letting them know what experiences they will gain. And let's see. Highlighting skills, mentioning a problem, connecting to a community. Are there any others that might be recommended recruitment messages that can really attract high-quality VISTA members? These skills.
Molly, I don't know if you pointed out, make sure that it connects a VISTA member to future employment.
Ah, great. Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah.
Let's see. Focusing on an industry from Megan. And what?
Exciting picture of mission and accomplishment in readers' minds.
These are terrific, Molly. And they're exactly the kind of thing that we're talking about, like really that standout thing. What is it that we've got in there? Let's move forward for just a second. So we always start with what we know. We've just been talking about this VAD and what kind of things it really ought to include. In that recruitment component, we really want to hit hard on the skills required and the competencies required and trying to then match that up with where we're going to actually find people with those particular skills and where we should look. We really want to focus in the time that we have left here also about the adding some flair. We need potential candidates to click the teaser before we can get them to even look at our program offering. So no matter how great our program offering is, if our teaser doesn't draw them in, we're not going to get that particular piece. And I noticed I'm going to go forward for just a second here. We'd like to introduce you to a particular technique called the word bank that will hopefully help us kind of build a little more exciting teasers. And part of the reason we look at this is because, frankly, we've had VISTAs report back to us that when they went online to the My AmeriCorps and looked at some of the sites and the listings that were there, they're like, it's a little dry. There wasn't anything that really was all that exciting. And it's kind of interesting because I've talked to supervisors and I've asked them about their service listings, and I said, if I pulled yours out and put yours up, and they're like, oh, don't do that. And I'm like, why? What's up with that? And they're like, well, it would need some work. And I'm like, okay, we really want to take a look at what are we putting out there, and are we really enticing people in with what we're doing? Because I hear supervisors tell me, oh, I'm having trouble recruiting people. Well, what are we putting out there when it comes to this piece? So we wanted to just give you one example of one tool that might be used, which is the word bank. We recognize that, and the nice thing about this particular tool is, frankly, it can help us get out of a rut. Because I know from spending time with supervisors, you're a really creative bunch. But sometimes we get into rut mode, and we're just like, okay, what do I got to do to get myself out of there? And in this particular case, this slide was created using the word bank method at a training with AmeriCorps VISTA members. The idea is that you randomly pick a word from a list, which we are going to share with you in the materials from this, the word bank list. And that might mean when you pick a random word is that you might close your eyes and point your finger on the page and see what you get, or you might assign a number to with each word and then draw a slip of paper with a number on it to see which one you got. Whatever you use in order to get a random word. Then you do a word association. So what that means is that it's what's the first word that comes to mind when you think about the selected word. That new word is the one that you will use to help create your teaser. In this particular example, the VISTA's got the word rock and made the word association to the word diamond, and they created from there. So this is what they actually came up with. A VISTA, mined from the city streets and rural landscapes across America, placed under pressure in the underserved communities of our nation, emerging like diamonds. Are you willing to be transformed? Let's give this a try. In this particular case, we picked a number between 1 and 64. We looked at the word bank, and the word that we got was umbrella. So when you hear the word umbrella, what's the first word that comes to mind? I'd like you to enter that into the chat box, please. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you come into hear umbrella?
Well, we see a lot of responses for rain. We also have shelter, protection, covered, cover, wet, coverage, the beach. That's great. Colorful. Let's see, got some more rain coming in. Prepared. Sun, rainbow. We have lots of options, although it looks like rain might be the most popular one, Kathy.
And it was one of the first ones out there, so that's going to be our word association word. We're going to, by the way, Molly, it sounds like you're doing a weather report.
Right. There's no
snow. We're going to go ahead and start to draft out a teaser using the word rain, because that's going to be our word association word. So let's go to the next slide. In this case, we're trading a teaser for WCS, which has been our example organization all the way along. They're trying to ensure that children of incarcerated parents receive the educational, social, and emotional support they need. So according to their VAD, they're going to be building the capacity by developing a sustainable volunteer recruitment and management system for its mentoring program. What I'd like you to do in the chat box, using the word rain, what would be some two-line teasers, some introductory sentences that we could use just to brainstorm to come up with our teaser that would be no more than 200 characters long in the final production? Don't worry about perfection. We're brainstorming. Let's just toss some ideas out and have some fun with this. What are some things about rain that we could say that recruit a VISTA to work on this particular project?
Great. So it looks like the first one that came in is, when the rain of your life comes, we are here to help.
I know the brains are out there thinking. Go ahead and just jot them down. Don't worry about perfection. Let us know your first thoughts. So we'll go ahead and put them out there.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we have the one from Alicia. Now we've got another one. Let's see. Rain down ideas and excitement upon your volunteers. Another response is, helping our children come out of the rain. We are here to get you on the right track.
Knowing rain is forecast, we have the tools to help you use your skills to keep it away.
We all have rainy days. Be the sunshine in the life of a child. Coordinate the ABC mentoring program.
Be ready to emerge as the protector of vision and volunteers.
There are many children that are out here in the rain with no protection. Can you be their umbrella to help them stay dry through life?
Flowers need rain to survive. Our kids need you.
And another one from William is, help protect our residents from the downpours of life.
Collaborate with fellow VISTA members to rain down educational, emotional, and health services on the community.
Another one about sunshine and children is, come in from the rain and give sunshine to children.
Like a rain barrel. You will collect the experience you need to make a difference in your community.
I think you guys get the idea. There are some great ones in there. It would be perfect for what we're trying to do to recruit mentors. The big thing here is that we're, trying to take what the core of what the intent is and spice up and add some flair. If you guys take a look in the middle, on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a little hand. That's where you raise your hand if you agree. click your hand and let me know. Do you agree that this is a useful tool? If you do, go ahead and raise your hand and let me know who thinks that it might be. Is it helpful to you as you look at these particular pieces? And I'm trying to look down to see if I can see. I see a number of hands going up, so terrific. We're trying to add some flair so that we can take that VAD that we've created that's going to be sound and tell them the details and make it exciting for them to actually make that click so that we can move forward on this particular piece. I'm going to move forward, Andy. We've got we've talked about the key elements of the VAD. We've tried to help you start to list out some member activities that help reflect that capacity building and engagement. And we've tried to help you think about that teaser so we can actually spice that up so that we can get them to the project description with our service opportunity listing. At this time, I think, Molly, I've got to turn it over to you so that we can get to some questions.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. What a great presentation. We all would love to hear questions from you. You can ask questions two ways. One is by using the Q&A panel on the right side of your screen, or else, Priscilla, the operator, would you be able to come back on and direct us how to ask questions via phone?
If you would like to ask a question, please press *1 from your touch-tone phone. Please unmute your phone and record your first and last name, as this information is needed to introduce your question. Once again, if you would like to ask a question, please press *1 from your touch-tone phone. If you wish to withdraw your question, please press *2. One moment to see if we have any questions.
Kathy, maybe while we're waiting for the first questions to come in, would you be able to talk about if someone feels inspired from this presentation today, how would they go about changing or updating the VAD to make it more pointed and to really get the most out of the year of service with a VISTA member?
If the VISTA is not there yet, this is your chance to actually talk among your staff and your volunteers and talk about what is it we're going to have them do. Let's actually start to brainstorm this out, tease it out, and then always follow up with your state office to make sure, or if you're a sub-site, and some of you may be sub-sites, talk with your site leader who's actually coordinating this with the corporation so that they know that the changes that you're talking about actually fit with the bigger program goals. And that can be a great conversation with them to say, here's what we're thinking, and this is how we could actually beef this up and make it even better. If your VISTA's already on site, this is our chance to actually talk with the VISTAs, bring their personal skills into this bigger piece. And a lot of times they'll actually help you create that piece if you're looking to beef that up given what their skill areas are. And it can also be a great piece then to help you know, here's something that we have to do, and that's not my skill area, but I would love some training. So here's the development component that we could be doing.
And, Kathy, we have a question. It's from a VISTA leader, and they would like to know, what are some other activities I could run through with my supervisors to help them develop and strengthen the VAD?
What would she say is, of the areas that we've talked about so far, I guess I would go through each of the key components, the key elements, and take a look and say, like, what is it that we can best see that we need some work on? And then what can we fill in? And frankly, that whole assess, act, and transfer component, I think is the component that has made it the easiest for the supervisors to start to think in terms of, as I've been talking with different supervisors. So the more that we can help them understand those key pieces, it really helps them start to think and ground into, here's how we're going to get started, here's the capacity building, and here's how this is going to last beyond us. And activity-wise, I'm just thinking at the top of my head here of, again, I'm a big person who likes to get in like index cards and paper like that and start to put ideas down on cards and start to play with it a little bit that way, because the nice thing about putting a single idea on an index card is that when I do that, if I change my line later, I can just make that card go away. But otherwise, I can actually take the cards and start to lay them out. And I've had people say, this is a great visual. I can actually see how we're going to get the results that we actually want, because we've started to lay this out. So visually it's very helpful to people to think that through. And as people actually start to try to lay cards out, they start to have conversations about what do we mean by that? What would that look like? So using that process of ending with that project goal, looking at the objectives, and then what are the member activities, working backwards from that end piece, using cards to actually help you do that will make it sometimes a little bit easier.
Okay. Great. And I'm just going to check in with our operator, Priscilla. Do we have any questions via the phone at this time?
There are no questions in queue at this time.
Okay. We'll go back to the questions in the Q&A box. And Natasha would like to know, as I mentioned earlier, and in light of everyone's creative responses, could we set up more sharing of resources, sharing our VADs between organizations? I think there's too much reinventing the wheel, and many of us have similar positions. So let's see. So we mentioned the VISTA campus. Is that right, Kathy?
Yes.
And there's other resources for sharing?
There's regular monthly webinars that are actually happening where people are talking. And on the VISTA campus itself, you can actually register yourself on the map and log in. So I know that I now have my login on there, and if there's similar people, they can actually click to say, can I? It's almost like a linked up feature within the VISTA campus itself. So supervisors can connect with other supervisors and start talking with each other to say, what have you got? What other kind of resources have you seen? So we can actually use that particular piece at the VISTA campus, which can be incredibly helpful. And the other nice thing about that particular feature is once the system, I know I don't mean to make this sound bad, but the system's going to notice what kind of things you're clicking on, and then if it says, oh, he or she seems to have an interest in this, it'll start to push certain documents your way that will fit in with what you're seem to be looking for, and just to try to be helpful. So it's kind of nice to know that those kind of resources are out there.
Yep, and we just had a post in the chat directing all of you to, or you can all join the VISTA Supervisor Forum, which is a really great resource and a good sharing tool. Let's see, Priscilla, do we have any questions via the phone at this time?
There are no questions in the queue at this time.
Okay.
And Molly, Sarah Masota raised a question, and I don't know if we ever answered it. Which was when recruiting for VISTA host sites, I'm assuming this is an intermediary looking at sub-sites, do we advise we require potential host sites to complete a VAD as part of the application process? Or should we walk through the VADs together once they've been selected? Kathy, do you want to take a stab at that?
So if I understand the question, there's do we create a VAD beforehand as well as walk through it afterwards? Is that the question?
Yes, it really has to do, I believe, with an intermediary site looking at sub-sites and recruiting those sub-sites and wondering what's the best process. Have the VAD in hand and use that as a means to choose them, or rather choose them based on the strength of their proposal and then walk through the VAD?
Okay, well, if you're choosing VISTAs, you'll have to have a VAD in the system in order to get the VISTA. If you're using it to help select your sub-sites, I would take a look. It would be helpful to know, here's what we're proposing that we would use a VISTA for, but recognize that it's a living document. So this may be, if you think that they're a good fit with what you're doing, that's the time to make sure that you do some adjustments as you go through to say, here's some things that the bigger process is actually looking at. And also keep in mind that there may be adjustments, again, once you actually get the VISTA on site. So, again, once you've actually so you need it on the front end so that you have it for the recruitment, you have it for the development of the core piece, but you have to always then say, okay, and because it's a living document, I may need to make some adjustments once I have them on site. I also had a VISTA once say, Kathy, what if I fail miserably? And I'd say, well, you know what? Why would you fail? And they said, what if maybe the community isn't like I thought it was? I said, that's valuable information. You actually want to provide that feedback and let them know that you're making some adjustments into that because you learned something new about the community, and it could actually help someone else. it's not it's one thing if you just plain didn't do your job. It's a whole other thing if you've realized something about your community and use that as a learning opportunity. Patrick, I don't know if that helps, and if you have anything you want to add.
It does help, and I agree, and I believe what I would add is the value of the VAD is the clarity of the planning. So before VADs existed several years ago, we would look at the proposal itself and see if we could determine what the activities were clearly based on the proposal. If you're finding that your proposals don't lead you naturally to understanding what the VISTA's activities would be, then I would suggest giving them the VAD and ask. I think they'd need some orientation. I'm not sure you can just throw the form at them and expect them to grasp it easily. But walking them through what the VAD is about, I think would be a valuable practice.
And frankly, during the PSO, one of the things we talk with them about is we say to them, here's a blank piece of paper and here's some markers. Based on your reading of your VAD, what would it look like if you were wildly successful? And when the VISTAs are looking and thinking about that and looking at what's that their VAD says, they're trying to actually imagine, like, what would it look like if we were successful? That's a great tool to be able to say, so is this what you intended? And while I tell the VISTAs, you're not required to share this with your supervisors, but I think it would be a great question to ask your supervisors, what would it look like if we were wildly successful? Because this is about community engagement. I think it would be a great question to ask your advisory committee, what would it look like if we were wildly successful? And it's the picture that you drew and the picture that your supervisor would come up with and your advisory group from the community, would they all be the same? Because if they're not, boy, you can really understand why projects get off course pretty quickly.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for the questions. I think we are just about out of time. Patrick, Kathy, any last-minute thoughts?
Yes, I would like to say that we want to hear from everyone. So if you haven't seen it already, there's not a poll, but there's a survey gizmo to the right under the chat. If you could click on that and take the time to answer the questions, it'll keep us honest and helps us improve. And, of course, I want to thank everybody for their time and participation. Kathy, thank you. Molly, thank you. And all of you, please join us on our next webinar, which is supporting the whole VISTA on March 17th, same time, same place. Just check the webinars page under the Connect and Learn piece on the VISTA campus. And you can sign up for this and for future webinars. So until then, I'm going to say be well, stay warm, and hope to see you all again.